Well, David, why don't we start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and generally speaking, just a little bit about the journey you've been on.
Okay, well, I'm 52 this year. I live and was brought up in the southeast of England, in the county of Kent. I live somewhere different now. I'm just outside London now. I was brought up on the southeast coast. Youngest of six. Had a pretty good home life. However, my life outside my home was rubbish. It incorporated a period of sexual abuse. I contracted quite a serious illness after that, meningitis. And following on from that, I was just a young juvenile delinquent for a number of years. I was always getting in trouble with the police, which eventually led on to me being excluded from school because of my behaviour at school. So I got, if you like, trapped or I found the entrance to the school to prison pipeline. And for the next 30 odd years, the criminal justice system become something very constant in my life, very synonymous in my life. I'm not kind of making excuses. A lot of things that happened, a lot of things happened that in one aspect I have reasons, but I was always responsible at the end of the day. I mean, I was always responsible for every crime I committed, every wrongdoing I was involved in. And I accept that. And it's something I've always accepted over the years. If you're going to play the game and you get caught, you put your hands up. It's as simple as that. You don't hear many firemen complaining about being burnt when they join the fire service. So kind of similar thing, really. It wasn't until later on in life, around 2005, that I started to understand the importance of giving back. But within the prison environment, I became a mentor for an organisation called Shun Trust, who train prisoners that can read to teach prisoners who can't to read. Then I was trained after that by the Samaritans to become a listener. And it gave me an understanding of my peers. It gave me an understanding of myself. And it really did make me kind of look deep inside. And unfortunately, it all took place within a prison environment. So I kind of, prison fixed me in a way. It took a number of years, and there was obviously a lot more to the story, but I went through a period from 2004 to 2015 in quite, I was not present in my life. I'd stopped participating in my life. I was literally surviving. I mean, I spent quite a lot of my life surviving, but it was just, as a younger person, it was a lot easier. But as I was getting older, it was like, this is getting hard work, all this. And then drugs, alcohol began to play a huge significance rather than just a passing temporary role within my life. It became something that was a lot more heavier. And relationship breakdowns, jobs, losing homes, ended up on the streets a number of times. And in 2015, I'd had enough. I found myself back on the streets. I found myself with no one around me, back on drugs, back on alcohol. And I was in a really, really bad place and in a really bad way. And it kind of come to me that there was only one place that I knew where I could go back to, where I could fix myself. And that was prison. So I committed a crime that would give me a long enough sentence for me to be able to sort myself out. And I put it all together and, well, here we are now.
Exactly.
So excuse me while I grab a cloth, Joe. It's a bit warm.
That's fine. Go right ahead.
There you go. Sorry about that, people.
You spoke there just a little bit about your process, and at a point you talked about the importance of sort of giving back, and you talked about your role as a mentor. One of the things that loyal listeners of the show know that is I like to sort of compare and contrast more of our North American model, which is the risk needs responsivity model, with some of the more strength-based emerging desistance models that we see in the UK and in other parts of the world. And I know that's one of the distinctions, and we're finding more value in what you just said, David, that sort of that giving back, whether it's through mentorship or whatnot, really is a variable in the change process. Maybe speak to that a little bit for a bit, because again, that's not something we really look at in the American risk needs responsivity model. And I always thought, boy, we're missing something with that.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it was way back in 2005 that it happened, and it really did begin to open my eyes. And it wasn't just it obviously the process that I was going through and becoming a mentor and working with the guys I was working with. You need to build up that trust. You need to build up that bond of empathy. I mean, you've already got the connection. The connection's there. The commonality is already there. We're behind the wall. So that kind of part of it. So already they know that you're coming from a position or from the level. You're where they're at, if you like, because you're there as well. So there's nowhere else to be. But it kind of got me thinking about me, myself, and I a little bit more. Not in a selfish way, but to try and understand myself a little bit more from the kind of stories that I was hearing from other people. It's like, hold on a minute, that sounds a little bit like me. And okay, right, okay. So that was, but because of where it took place, it meant that I suppose I started to gain respect for what I was doing and who I was in prison. And I don't mean to say in a violent way, threatening way, intimidating, but kind of the way I was, what I was doing, the work that I was doing for other people. And it just is, I mean, you kind of spend your life gagging for attention. And here you are doing something quite simple. I mean, some of the stuff that I used to do to get attention, absolute craziness. And literally here I am, just sitting down with a guy, teaching him to read, and I'm finding more about myself and more about society, more about kind of the similarities between people in prison. That there's more similarities than there are differences. Mm-hmm. There's sometimes you think you're the only one, and it can take one person. I mean, it's happened to me a number of times. Comedians. I've sat back and I've listened to a comedian. I thought, oh my God, I thought I was the only one that done that, or I was the only one that's ever happened to. So it was that connection, or sorry, that kind of the connection, but that deeper connection. And again, I kind of began to understand who I was more. I become a better person because of it. Again, unfortunately, it happened behind the wall, not this side, and I couldn't really deal with society and people out here. I couldn't maintain relationships, my own family, my own children. I couldn't maintain relationships, loving relationships, if you like, in a relationship. So things were, I had a relationship with the streets, I had a relationship with crime, I had a relationship with a bottle, I had a relationship with foil and drugs and what have you, but I didn't have a relationship with myself, and I didn't have a relationship with the people around me. So that feeling that I was given in prison, that feeling of, speak to Dave and have a word with Dave and things like that, it really did make me fall in love with prison. But it made me fall in love with the environment because of who I become within that environment. And the environment very soon, one or the other, but either my personality matched the environment or the environment matched my personality. Maybe it was a mixture of both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What a beautiful illustration, sort of that parallel process of you're helping others while also learning about yourself and helping yourself.
Yeah, of course.
I know prison reform is now your passion, David. You're a TED speaker, a writer, a blogger, a published author. Not sure where to start, but let's start with the TED Talk. That sounds amazing. What was that experience like?
That was quite a surreal experience. There's a bit of a story behind it as well, because the original talk that I went with, some of the panel that obviously accepted my application, they felt it didn't touch on a certain areas. There's a little bit of a different message there. So they asked me to change it slightly. So when I went to the first edition, the first audition, the first stage, whatever you call it. Not audition. Well, I don't know, whatever. Curtain call. No, I don't know. So went for the first, whatever it was, and it didn't work. So they asked me to go back to the original one. So I went back for another test up there, and it all went fine, but I didn't quite get it right. And as far as I was concerned, I had 10 minutes to fill. So on the day itself, which was quite a surreal experience, I didn't really get to enjoy the experience until I'd like to do another one just to enjoy the experience. Because it's very difficult to still look back and try and enjoy the experience that was just so stressful and full of anxiety. It was unbelievable. But so when I got out on the stage, I stood on the spot, I've looked up and the clock said 6 minutes. So I had to immediately edit down a 10-minute talk that I wasn't quite confident with. Anyway, you weren't allowed notes. You couldn't, there was no screen in front of you to an auto cue to read from. So it was quite, it was quite an experience, but the thing is, it makes kind of things like this now a lot easier because things aren't going to go as bad as that again.
I've seen it. It's inspiring. I will leave a link
Thank
to
you.
that TED Talk in the episode notes of this podcast. So if you're listening and you want to see David's TED Talk, again, I'll leave a link in the episode notes for this podcast. I read your piece, David, entitled "To Say OU Changed My Life is an Understatement." And for my American audience, OU stands for Open University. Speak to the importance of education on your journey of change here.
Well, the two, I suppose, mentoring and education are parallel. They cause and effects, if you like. They become two in the same. Again, from 2005, getting into that was about education. So it made me understand the importance of education, but it also made me understand how much we underestimate, or I suppose underestimate is the power of reading, and how important reading is. I mean, it seems for people that can read, myself included, I struggle to try and imagine what it must be like for someone that can't read as an adult. I just can't. I've got half an idea because of the guys that I used to work with, but I can never imagine it. It's like seeing. You could never imagine going blind, I don't suppose. But we I forgot where I was going now with that one. So it was all about that education. So when you look at prison, it was all about it's a worded information, communication. It's all very heavily worded. I knew I'd get the words out in the end. It was all heavily worded. So again, even before you get into a prison system, which is quite a unique experience as it is, if you just add into that lack of not being able to read, so that alone shows you by itself the importance of education. Just the ability to read can change someone's life in prison, because I've seen guys go hungry where they're not able to. We have a pre-select menu on a weekly basis, and you have, it's going to sound quite a lot posher than what it actually is, but you get 5 choices for lunch and 5 choices for the evening. As I say, they're not the best meals in the world, but if you can't read the menu, you don't know what you're ordering. They go hungry, or they might order something they don't like without realising. So they're not going to tell anyone, because it can be quite embarrassing, and it's quite a stigma as well. And obviously it's a prison environment, so you don't want to end up being, you don't want to be vulnerable to other people. So that on its own, just that importance of reading, really does go to show you the importance of education. So for me, it kind of went on a little bit further, because I started to understand the importance of education. So therefore, I started focusing on my own education as well, and building on from being a mentor and then a listener. I went on to work in education, and I've done a level 2 assisted learning support. Then I went on to do a level 3 preparing to teach in the lifelong learning sector. And then later on, I went on to do a level 3 advice and guidance. And then the final one was an access module before going on to do my degree with the Open University. The last two, and the ALS and the petals, were really about putting everything together. I mean, the last two more than the petals and the ALS, those were about helping guys out in prison. So it was really about this sentence where I thought, I'm going to put everything together for me. I'm not going to do it to help people in prison while I'm in prison. I'm going to get out and I'm going to do exactly what I was doing in prison, but I'm going to do it outside of prison this time. So I can stay out and do it from out here. So yeah, that was why I've always been, I suppose, a campaigner, an activist, if you like, or I was an activist, now a campaigner, and I'd done it the wrong way. I used the wrong language. I didn't, you won't be shocked, but I couldn't put forward an argument in the right way. I was still an area arts prisoner, do you know what I mean? I was trying to learn something. So this is where I am now, is that I'm now in a position where I've got the lived experience. Based on that lived experience, gave me the passion and, if you like, the voice. And then the qualifications and the education was for me to be able to put it all together to do what I'm doing now. There's one thing having lived experience, there's another thing having a voice and a passion, but being able to do it in the right way and for the right purpose, that's something entirely different.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Is that your puppy we're hearing tiptoeing
Yeah,
around?
excuse my dog's running about.
That's all right. He's a star. So just in your experience, David, broadly speaking, painting with, again, broad brushstrokes, what works in rehabilitation and reentry, and then conversely, what doesn't work?
What doesn't work? Doing the same thing that we've been doing for years. That doesn't work. So that's that part. What does work? Well, look, at the end of the day, certain things do work, because otherwise we'd have 100% reoffending rates, and we don't. Our reoffending rates on average, I mean, there are certain different levels here, like for over that time, under this time, but on average, I'd say that our reoffending rates are around 42 to 50%. If you start, that's the average. If you bring in under 12 months, you're looking at around about 62%. And that is the area that I try, and that's the cohort, if you like, for me, that fall through the gaps. They're the ones that continually fall through the net. I mentioned to someone the other day that we talk about all these support agencies and everything else around it as a safety net. The thing with nets is they have holes in, and people continue to fall through. So it was about plugging all those gaps in my own life, first and foremost, so that obviously I could come out and kind of do the same thing out here.
What would you say, David, to either a prison warden or a governor, as you say over there, or even a well-intentioned probation officer is doing everything that the training manual says, but you just want to give them some advice about how they could do their job better, something that they might not be seeing, amongst the X's and O's of the playbook?
Well, I mean, it's I think sometimes I feel sorry for probation officers and correctional officers, prison officers, because they do get the rough end of the stick. They're not the ones that make the policies and the procedures, and it comes down to time. That's for probation officers and prison officers. It comes down to time. The way forward is through relationships, as we like to call it in this country, dynamic security. That's where you're talking to people. You use your mouth. If there's someone shouting at you, you talk quietly. Otherwise, once you start shouting, there's nowhere else to go apart from up. So that dynamic security, that relationship, but then the system itself has to realize that, and they have to try and create the system so that prison officers have as much time as they possible to be. No one joins, there might be 1%, 0.5%, but no one really joins the service to lock people up. They join the service because they've seen something. They join the service because they want to help. They want to make a difference. They want to help change people's lives. Yet the system doesn't give them the opportunity or the time to be able to do that through understaffing and underinvestment. And that's been something that's gone on for years. So it really is that relationship. It's looking at people from a position of empathy and not apathy, understanding that everyone's got a story to tell. And 9 times out of 10, when you hear that story, you're more likely to be sad than you are angry. And you're more likely to understand what's actually gone on. But it's easy to say that for me, because I'm in the criminal justice system. Whether or not I would have had that view had I not been in the criminal justice system, I don't know, because of the media, of the government, of the way that from the top down, that stigma of discrimination begins and it just filters down. Was we need to flip that, and we need to start seeing the more positive language and the right policies. Yeah, fair enough. There are victims of crime, but I'd say that 90% of people in prison were also once victims or are still victims themselves. So why aren't those important? And it's also about the families for the prison officers and for probation officers to understand it isn't just the individual that serves a sentence. And 9 times out of 10, it's a lot easier for the individual serving a sentence because they've got everything sorted out for them. It's the people out here that are running around, that are getting pushed from pillar to post, they're being misinformed, uninformed, not cared about. And that affects the generational situation in respect of parental imprisonment. Unless you break that chain, I mean, I've seen grandfathers and grandchildren in prison at the same time with the father in as well. That's not right. That needs to stop. And yes, fair enough. There's the grandfather, the father, and the child. But where's society in this? Where's their intervention? Why haven't they got involved to stop this? We know that if you've got a parent in prison, your child is 6 times more likely to any other child to end up in prison. We know that. And if we're not doing anything about it, whose fault is it when that child ends up in prison? The child or us as a society for knowing what we know, but still doing nothing about it?
A perfect segue to my next question when you were talking about the media and stigma. What's one thing the public gets wrong about prisons and or our rehabilitation efforts? What's a misconception you'd like to correct that the general
Yeah,
public holds?
again, it really comes down from the top because I don't think when you get to you're going to get the ignorant people. And to be honest with you, with ignorant people, you might as well be explaining the smell of the number 10. You're not going to win. But there are people that I suppose they're too busy to understand fully what's going on. And therefore they rely on the media, the newspapers and the government to tell them what's going on because they're having to work 35 hours a day to be able to pay for the life that the government tell them is a successful life. The only thing is they don't get an opportunity to be able to take time in it because they're always working to pay for it and they never see their kids. So it's about just don't believe everything you read. Question it. We're not all murderers, rapists, paedophiles, and terrorists in prison. There's a lot of people in prison for the first time with one mistake. So it's about, really question. Don't believe everything you hear. There's always 2 sides to a story. Unfortunately, it's like, I suppose with war, the victors get to write the history. In respect to the criminal justice system, it's like the prosecution and the media and the judge and the public, they get to write the history, and yet the people in prison don't get their story told. They don't get their voice heard, and they should, because I think the public would have a lot more empathy if they understood the actual causes of crime itself. And I think Aristotle or Marcus Aurelius was responsible for saying that the mother of crime is poverty is the mother of crime. With poverty, you have hunger. And then you get to a point where the fear of not accessing your need becomes more than the fear of the punishment. So prison is secondary to me or an individual not being able to get that next drink, not being able to get that food to feed their family, not being able to buy their next piece of drugs, because drugs becomes an illness. Once you're addicted, it becomes an illness. However, the reasons why you first get onto the drugs, 9 times out of 10, is because of trauma. So it's all of these multiple disadvantages, these multiple needs. No wonder people, and we criminalize that. We're criminalizing it. It's not why it's as if we're criminalizing mental health and poverty. We're already criminalizing immigration. We're already criminalizing, well, basically everything in life, really. I mean, it's just how many laws there are, I don't know. So the chances are every single one of us is a lawbreaker.
Correct. Right. We are they and they are us. You're an extremely busy man, David. What's next on the horizon? Or if I had you back on the show in 5 years, what do you think we might be talking about? Or
in 5 years, in 5 years' time, if things are going on the way they're doing, you'll have me back on the show to talk about the prisons that are now closing in the United Kingdom due to the policies that are being influenced right now by members of lived experience teams and forums all around the UK. The voices of lived experience, especially the lived experience of the criminal justice system, is really starting to be listened to by the people who need to be listening. Our probation service, our Ministry of Justice, Her Majesty's Probation and Prison Service, the Prison Probation Ombudsman. I'm sure I've missed somebody out there, but our prisons, they're listening. They are listening, and changes are starting to happen. We're starting to understand that we need to look at the criminal justice system just as much from health as we do from criminal side of things. We need the health department involved, not just the justice department.
I love that you aim high with the closing of prisons, David. I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. And to your point, it's why I love having folks such as yourself with lived experiences on the show. I always say you're the true subject matter experts, not academics or politicians or probation officers. But again,
yeah, I agree. But then I think a room full of a representative from each of those parties will find the solutions a lot quicker. That this isn't about who's right. It's about what's right. Don't worry about who takes the credit. Let's get the change in. Let's get that reform going. Stuff credit. I wouldn't care if I had my name put to anything. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in change and reform because I've seen too much. I've seen too many lives ruined. I've seen too many families. I've been to too many funerals. No, it's not right. And a lot of it is not because people have problem with crime. It's because they have problem with poverty, hunger, drug addiction, family imprisonment, whatever.
David, I'm so glad our paths crossed. You are an inspiration, and I'm going to mark it on my calendar and remember to have you back in 5 years. But I'm sure we'll talk before then. David, like I said, I'll leave the link to your YouTube or your TED Talk rather in the link or the description rather of this podcast episode. I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
You're welcome, Joe. Thank you so much, and a nice debut from the pair of dogs as well.
I love it. I love it. All right. Be well, David.
And you, Joe. Thank you very much.